This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
G5 Sahel forces kill at least 24 militants in Burkina Faso and a Mali raid. The World Food Programme warns of an escalating humanitarian crisis in central Sahel. And Chancellor Angela Merkel calls for transparency from African leaders. This is CGTN. Welcome to Africa Live with me, Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. We'll bring you the details on those stories in just a moment. But first, Rama Nyang with the day's business headlines. Rama.
That's right, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in the course of the hour. The Kenyan lender Equity Bank takes over DR Congo's second largest bank. And Uganda returns to China asking for funding to construct a new standard gauge rail line that will connect it to Kenya. We'll have the details on those stories and lots more coming your way in the course of the hour. For now, though, let's start with the latest in current affairs with Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And let's start off in the Sahel region, where 24 suspected militants have been killed during a raid by the G5 Sahel troops. The offensive was supported by France. It took place on the border between Burkina Faso and Mali. A bomb-making workshop was destroyed and over 100 phones and weapons were seized. The identities and affiliations of the militants have not been made public, but Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are known to operate within the border zone of Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso. Security forces have been struggling to contain the spread of violence by the militant groups. In Mali, the army says a militant attack has left 24 soldiers dead near the border with Niger. 29 others were wounded. CGTN's Wilkis Tanyabwa reports.
The soldiers came under attack in the northern Gao region as they were on patrol during a joint operation with troops from Niger. This incident comes just weeks after militants attacked a military base and killed 54 soldiers. Hours before the Malian army reported the new attack, Senegalese President Macky Sall had raised concerns on the security coordination in the Sahel.
More than 14,000 men from the MINUSMA are on the field, which is taken hostage by a bunch of individuals. There is a problem. Why are we not capable of dealing with this? We need to figure out and put together actions and gather everyone into one command. That is where the UN has to be able to come and bring in new concepts. Otherwise, as I've already said, we are not here to put the UN on trial, but it has to agree to reform itself and reform its procedures.
Violence in the Sahel has surged in the recent past with heavy military and civilian losses in Mali and Burkina Faso.
But this is not the Secretary General's fault. It is the fault of the states themselves, particularly the permanent members of the Security Council. On the subject of mandates, they can block if 1 or 5 does not agree, then they can stop the project for good. There lies the problem. Mali needs a robust mandate.
No group has so far claimed responsibility over Monday's assault. From strongholds in Mali, groups with Al-Qaeda and Islamic State links have been able to fan out across the Sahel, also destabilizing parts of Niger and Burkina Faso. Wilkis Anyabwa, CGTN.
Meanwhile, the United Nations World Food Programme has warned of an escalating humanitarian crisis in Burkina Faso and neighboring countries in the central Sahel region. There has been a sharp increase in violence, and the country is also feeling the impact of climate change. The WFP says action is needed to protect and save lives. CGTN's Tulisha Balala has the story.
61-year-old Zoe Yusuf has taken refuge in a makeshift shelter in Pasila, a town north of the capital Ouagadougou. Yusuf and his 24 family members fled on foot from the village of Guba in search of safety from militant attacks.
When they killed my brother, I hid in a riverbed and I came back in the morning to save my family. I left everything behind, no bicycle, no clothes, just the clothes that I'm wearing right now.
They made it here, where they live among more than 36,000 displaced people. And life is not easy. People here need assistance.
What we need now is food. Everything else can wait. Once we get food, then we will worry about clothes.
The United Nations World Food Programme and other humanitarian agencies are trying to address the growing crisis. But they are running out of funds to support the relief efforts.
As we speak, millions of people are desperately hungry in the Sahel. Hundreds of thousands of people are being displaced. Thousands of people are being killed because of extremism and violence. In Burkina Faso alone, there's been a 500% uptick in increase in displacement. 1/3 of the nation is now a conflict area. This is a catastrophe, and we've got to act, and we've got to act now.
The World Food Programme says it urgently needs $150 million for operations across the Sahel. The money will go towards emergency relief and resilience building programs for 2.4 million people from Mali, Niger and Burkina Faso. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
Well, CGTN's Phil Ihaza is in Abuja. He's joining me live for more on that developing story. Phil, nearly 2.5 million people in Africa's central Sahel region are in need of immediate food assistance. How bad is the situation?
Well, thank you, Beatrice. If I'm to quote the words or the phrase of the spokesperson of the World Food Programme, that's Mr. Hervé Verheussel, in his words, he says, if we do not act now to tackle hunger in the Sahel, a whole generation are at risk. Now, going by that statement, it tells you how severe, how dire this situation in the Sahel region is looking at the moment, especially with the fact that they've profiled Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger as a country leading in the challenge. They say that, according to the report, that 20 million people live in these areas, and so far they're exposed to humanitarian challenges, a looming hunger strike and all of that. They also say that almost one child in every 3 children in this region is faced with malnutrition challenges, is also out of school, and there's a need for a huge form of assistance in terms of humanitarian, in terms of food and relief to be given to this region to see how that they can kill and also safeguard a generation that is at risk.
Well, how many countries exactly in the region are affected, and what kind of help are they getting at the moment?
Well, according to the report, it says just Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger are the main countries facing or leading this challenge. But we know that we also have some other countries in the Sahel, including Nigeria, which has a large swath of land in its northeast that has been, bordered by insecurity challenges, especially the insurgency for 10 years now. We also know that there's Chad, there's, Benin Republic. These countries share borders in the Sahel region, and that's the reason why we get to see some of these challenges affecting them. But you recall that in 2013, under the reign of the former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon, he said that there is a need for the world to come together to assist the Sahel region to see how that they can help to cater for the insecurity challenge. I can recall at that time as well, world leaders pledged over $8 billion to see how that they can, in tranches for 7 years, that's 2013 to 2020, release funds that will help in tackling this issue. We don't know how far those funds have been distributed. We don't know if they've been implemented effectively, but it also shows that more is needed to be done.
So more is needed to be done, though, but we are also seeing an increase in the number of violent incidents in the region. Why is that, though?
Well, a couple of factors will be considered. Speaking to security analysts recently, they've mentioned the fact that these regions have a common challenge. That's the fact that there's not enough government presence in these regions, especially with the people there. We also know that there's a huge number of people living in extreme poverty in those regions. Taking, for example, Nigeria, which has almost 100 million people living in extreme poverty. That sort of cut across to other countries in the Sahel that are facing the brunt of this challenge. We also know that the borders, not enough is done to monitor these borders, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, and the rest of other countries. We also know that, according to the security analysts, they're saying that more efforts should also be, channeled towards the aspect of reducing the extremism preached among religious bodies, mainstream religious communities, to take out willing recruits by the insurgents.
So in terms of that concern over escalating human crisis, though, how are governments and regional bodies dealing with that situation?
Well, we know that there was a meeting just recently, that's in September, about 2 months ago, by the ECOWAS leaders, West African leaders. That happened in Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou to be precise. And at the end of the meeting, leaders from the ECOWAS region, member states, they were able to raise $1 billion. But then we know that those funds are supposed to be towards, improving security response and tackling insecurity in the Sahel region, in the West African region, and those funds are supposed to be disbursed between 2020 to 2024. So we're hoping also that that will go a long way in tackling insurgency, but also we know that there's a lot of response as well and support from the European Union, from Western bodies, other countries like the G5 force, which is led by French and comprises of military from Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and a couple of these Sahel countries. But going by the word of the former UN Secretary General, he says the challenges in this region respect no border, and therefore the solutions should also go a long way in not giving respect to the borders, because if the challenge is affecting any of these countries, it could affect the world as well, because we're looking at insurgency.
All right, Philly Hazard joining us there from Abuja. Thank you. Let's now go to Ethiopia, where after long-running campaigns, the Sidama people are set to vote in a referendum to determine whether they will form an autonomous regional state. The diverse southern nations, nationalities and peoples region is one of 9 ethnic-based regional states. They're overseen by the central government in the capital, Addis Ababa, but enjoy a level of autonomy over issues such as land, resources, taxation and security. Well, let's cross over now to Addis Ababa, and CGTN's Girum Charles joining us live from there. Girum, so after a long-running campaign, the Sidama people are set to vote in a referendum on whether to form an autonomous regional state. What more can you tell us on the eve of the referendum?
Beatrice, this is a historic time for the people of Sidama, or as a country as well. The turnout of people to register to vote whether to remain in the southern nations and nationalities region of Ethiopia under the federal government or to form their own autonomous region has been quite a process. And according to the National Electoral Board of Ethiopia, more than 2.3 million Sidamans have been registered to cast their votes, to have their voices heard across the country. Just to take you back a little bit, the question of Sidamans to form their own autonomous region is not a question that has come recently. It has been there for quite a long time, at least for the last close to 30 years under the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. They have been asking, we can do it on our own. This is also based on the constitution of the country, but their questions have been somehow, not having any answers of the sort that they wanted for a long time. Now, the time has come that they are going to cast their ballots. Their voices are going to be heard. More than 1,600 voting stations have been prepared, and in just a few hours' time, we shall see what their choices are going to be. But this is historic for the people of Sidama and Ethiopia, Beatrice.
So, Girum, it is a historic time for the people of the Sidama, but what about other regions? What is the feeling of other regions on that referendum of the Sidama people?
Under the Ethiopian constitution, also the way Ethiopia is being laid, the federal state itself, allows nations and nationalities to govern themselves on their own. They want to create their own states and also continue providing what is necessary for the unity of Ethiopia, for the peace and prosperity of the country as well. So other regions more or less are supportive of what the initiative of Sidama is. There are also individuals or groups who have cautious understanding of the question of the people of Sidama, saying that this might be ethnically motivated, this might be an individual request, this might be something that is coming because others do not want to live with the southern regional states grouping itself. This might be something that has come because they have seen other regions governing themselves and they have no legal ground, this and that. But most regions in this country, in the federal system itself, are supportive of the fact that, okay, this question has come from one of the legitimate ethnic groups in this country, and they should be entertained according to the law. And that's why the National Electoral Board has paved the way for them, and we shall see what the result is going to be tomorrow.
All right, Girum, as we see what the result is tomorrow, though, there must be a feeling from the other regions in Ethiopia. So how will the affirmative vote impact the lives of the Sidama people and of Ethiopia as a whole?
This federal state provides, although the central government itself, the one in Addis Ababa, the federal state has autonomies, has power over almost all of the regional states in here, we should also understand that each regional grouping has its own mandates, its own privilege, if you like. One of them is governing its own people. So Sidamas are going to enjoy governance through their own grouping, their own people. So there will be a Sidama regional state president, there will be bureau heads and other employees are going to come from the same ethnic group. The budgeting is the other issue. Budget is going to be allocated for that region if they are going to be, or when they are going to become a region on their own. And also, generally, apart from this, they can also be, coming out as one of the most important and strongest regional states in this federal government. So their voices can be heard much better than the SNNPR, the Southern Nations and Nationalities region grouping itself, because they are going to be one region on their own. So it has multifaceted benefits, but again, we shall see if that's going to be the case or not after the referendum is finished, Beatrice.
Indeed, Girum Chala joining us there from Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. Now, German Chancellor Angela Merkel is calling for a better business environment in Africa to get more German companies to invest on the continent. She made the remarks in Berlin, where African leaders gathered for the G20 Compact with Africa Summit. Here's Jane Keo with more on that story.
Ahead of the official opening of the conference, Angela Merkel said German firms are ready to invest in Africa. But she says the companies need reassurance their interest will be better protected.
We believe, and I'm deeply convinced about this, that more transparency can encourage more investment in these countries. Because for investors from G20 countries, such as German medium-sized companies, it is very, very important that there is trust.
Germany already has a working partnership with African nations such as Ghana, Tunisia and Cote d'Ivoire. Senegal and Ethiopia joined the program on Tuesday.
We want to create incentives so that when the countries participating in Compact with Africa are successful, investment conditions for companies are improved.
In 2017, when Germany held the G20 rotating chair, it prioritized addressing mass migration in underdeveloped countries, including those in Africa. Germany is not the only one seeking to have an economic footprint in Africa. So far, China is the continent's largest trading partner. France, Russia and the US have held similar conferences with African leaders. The motive clearly is to have an economic share on the continent. Jane Keo, CGTN.
To Libya now, where Eastern Libyan-based forces, the LNA, say they have carried out airstrikes on the port city of Misrata. The attacks targeted military hardware and munition storages. General Khalifa Haftar has been increasing his airstrikes against rivals in Tripoli and Misrata this week. Here's Adel Mahroui with more.
Forces led by Libyan General Khalifa Haftar say they have successfully launched airstrikes against military storage facility in Misrata. The attacks took place on the early hours of Tuesday. They targeted Libya's Air Force Academy in the coastal city. Misrata is the second largest city in western Libya. For months, it has been the strongest defense line to the capital, Tripoli. Since April, Haftar has been in a pursuit to take over the capital, which is based to the internationally recognized government of national accord. Residents in Misrata have been reporting that the latest attacks were notably much stronger than the usual airstrikes against the city. LNA says the destroyed storage facility had 19 Turkish-made armored vehicles and newly imported ammunition. The strikes indicate an escalation between Western and Eastern forces over the capital, Tripoli. The LNA's campaign began in April. Since then, both sides have been using drones and airstrikes. The Misrata city attack came few hours after an airstrike on a biscuit factory in the capital, Tripoli. At least 40 have been killed and injured in what the UN Libya envoy says could constitute a war crime. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Nigeria plans to end open defecation by 2025. And the UN Security Council urged to form unified solution to Libyan conflict.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
It is estimated that close to 50 million Nigerians have no access to toilet facilities and defecate in the open. And UNICEF estimates that each year more than 100,000 children under the age of 5 die due to diarrhea. 90% of the deaths are directly attributed to unsafe water and sanitation. The Nigerian government says it plans to end open defecation by 2025, but that it is not seeming likely. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmos with more on that story.
Lack of access to toilets is why around 47 million Nigerians defecate in the open, and that makes the country the open defecation capital of the world, overtaking India.
It is also my singular honor to formally declare a state of emergency on Nigeria's water supply, sanitation and hygiene sector.
It's been a year now since President Muhammadu Buhari declared that emergency on open defecation. But not much has changed on the ground. Open defecation has also been identified as contributing to violence against young girls and young married women, with one study by WaterAid in selected slums in Lagos revealing a quarter of women defecating in the open had either first or second-hand experience of harassment, a threat of violence, or actual assault. With its massive population and inadequate infrastructure, Lagos is one of the most impacted cities in the country. Slum communities like this one, which dot the city, are the most affected. With a near absence of toilet facilities, residents of these slums defecate in the open and into the water.
Why do we have open defecation? How many public toilets do we have? And people eat every day and they have to pass out every day. When you have input, there must be output. So Where are the toilets? We need a lot more public toilets. Then another thing is we need to continue to talk to our people.
As part of that talking more to the people, the city's authorities now send sanitation officials to markets to talk to residents against defecating in the open, which is usually common around markets. The World Bank estimates that Nigeria's open defecation challenge is costing the country a whopping $3 billion annually due to poor sanitation. The government launched an ambitious campaign in 2016 to end open defecation by 2025, but the country would need around $2.7 billion to be able to achieve that. In the face of dwindling government revenue, it's difficult to see how that can be achieved. Some private groups are, though, coming to the rescue.
If we need to have 2 million toilets a year, through Nigerians in Diaspora in the Commission, we are mobilizing 1 million Nigerians to adopt 1 toilet for each household.
To meet the 2025 target, Nigeria needs to build 2 million toilets every year from 2019 to 2025. But at the moment, the country is only managing to do around 100,000 toilets annually.
It's a catastrophe. It's a crisis. You know, only 34% of Nigerians have access to toilets. You know, a lot of us, over 100 million people are openly defecating. This is a crisis, and I think that the government has done what it needs to do, you know, to declare a state of emergency and to make sure that everybody recognizes that all hands have to be on deck.
In October 2014, India embarked on a 5-year mission to eliminate open defecation nationwide, building millions of toilets and running campaigns to change the habits of hundreds of millions of its citizens. Nigeria is now copying that example. In addition to the toilets it is building across the country, it plans to carry out a massive behavioral change campaign to get people to dump the habit of open defecation. But it's not looking like the 2025 target would be met. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, let's return to Libya, where security continues to be a pressing issue. Months of insecurity have displaced thousands, disrupting an already fragile peace in the capital, Tripoli. The head of the United Nations Support Mission in Libya has called on Security Council members to stop interfering in the conflict.
Over 7 months ago, troops loyal to Eastern Military Commander General Khalifa Haftar started their mission to take control of the capital city, Tripoli. The UN-backed government of National Accord fought back, resulting in months of insecurity. Both sides enjoy support from different international countries. Ghassan Salameh, the head of the UN support mission in Libya, called on the Security Council to form a unified front.
Ending the conflict and agreeing to the way forward is a realistic prospect. All that is needed now is for you, the international community, to come together to provide the necessary umbrella for the Libyan parties themselves to join hands to end the conflict and resume dialogue.
Even on the ground, the conflict has taken on an international dimension. A recent airstrike on a biscuit factory killed several people, including citizens from Niger, Egypt, and Bangladesh. The UN-backed government blamed troops loyal to General Haftar for the attack.
This situation, as you know, is a result of the disagreements over the situation in Libya in this council, whose members should all work to reach a form of an agreement through which atrocities and crimes in my country can be stopped, and to follow a unified strategy that would face up to those who are trying to prevent Libyans from reaching an agreement to unify them and start the process of building a modern state.
Several countries, including Kuwait, called on member states to respect the current arms embargo. Astatal, CGTN.
In Hong Kong, a standoff between police and a holdout group of protesters at the Polytechnic University continues. The UN Human Rights Office says some use of extreme violence by some demonstrators, including against police, is deeply regrettable and cannot be condoned. A spokesman also urged Hong Kong authorities to de-escalate the situation at the Polytechnic University. Chief Executive Carrie Lam is now calling for a peaceful resolution of the standoff. Our correspondent Shu Shinchen has more from Hong Kong.
I'm now in Hong Kong's busy Causeway Bay area. It's where many of the largest rallies and protests were held. Yet it is slowly returning to business as usual. It's mostly due to the fact that most of the protesters have fled to other areas like Kowloon, where the Polytechnic University of Hong Kong is still occupied by radicals. A lot of new developments came Tuesday in the ongoing standoff between protesters and the police at the university. With the new police commissioner Chris Tan taking over, we've seen a stepped-up approach in tackling violent protests. Upon his appointment, Tan expressed his commitment to the rule of law. According to the police, as of Tuesday afternoon, some 1,100 demonstrators have been arrested at the Polytechnic University. It has been occupied by radicals since the past weekend. Police allowed school officials to enter the PolyU campus to persuade protesters to leave, and that resulted in some 600 leaving the campus voluntarily Tuesday morning. 1/3 are under the age of 18, and most are not students at PolyU. Meanwhile, Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam said during her weekly briefing that he and Commissioner Tan have agreed to solve the PolyU occupation peacefully. Meanwhile, the police said almost 4,000 gas bombs were found at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, which was abandoned by demonstrators before they moved on to occupy PolyU. 300 liters of concentrated acid were missing, which could have been used to create petrol bombs. Xu Xinchen, CGTN, Hong Kong.
China's National People's Congress has expressed deep concern after the Hong Kong High Court ruled an anti-mask law unconstitutional. A spokesperson said only the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, China's top legislature, can judge and decide whether regulations in Hong Kong comply with the Basic Law. On Monday, Hong Kong police said they have stopped enforcing the anti-mask law after the High Court's ruling. The prohibition of face covering regulation was invoked last month by Chief Executive Carrie Lam. She said it aims to deter protesters from violence and restore order. It is based on the Emergency Regulation Ordinance, which gives the Chief Executive power to make laws in times of emergency. The UN Human Rights Office says that Israeli settlements in occupied Palestinian territory remain unlawful. The statement was a response to the U.S. announcement on Monday that it was abandoning its 4-decade-old position that the settlements were illegal under international law. A spokesman for the office said in Geneva that a change in the policy position of one state does not modify existing international law, nor its representation, its interpretation by the International Court of Justice and the Security Council. He added that the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949, which both the United States and Israel ratified, lays down that an occupying power shall not transfer parts of its own civilian population into the territory it occupies. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, the change of U.S. policy drew praise from Israeli settlers and condemnation from Palestinians.
This administration constitutes a real threat on world peace and security. And as Palestinians, we will stand tall with international law. We know we are under occupation.
I'm happy and amazed that the President of the United States, Mr. Trump, recognized the settlements, and I wish it will be a step to make a peace between us and the Palestinians.
The decision that was made in America about Israel, it is something we know from the Mediterranean Sea to the Jordan River. It belongs to the people of Israel. The rest can be here as tourists. Welcome. But it belongs to us, and there's no need to even discuss it, because it's ours.
Let's now go to Ramanyang for a look at the day's business news. Rama.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business. The Kenyan lender Equity Bank has taken over DR Congo's second largest bank. And Uganda's asking China for funding to construct a new standard gauge rail line that would connect to the one in Kenya.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Let's start in the banking world. Kenya's Equity Group, the second largest bank in the country by assets, has entered into a deal to acquire a majority stake in Banque Commerciale du Congo. BCDC, as it's more commonly known, is the second largest bank in the DRC. Equity Bank has purchased a 66.5% majority stake. This comes as EGH Equity Bank Group, that is, steps up its ambitious geographical diversification plan. It's a chance for the group to take further steps towards the delivery of its vision of building Sub-Saharan Africa's premier financial institution. Equity Bank will be paying a cash consideration of about $105 million for just over 625,000 shares. The purchase is inclusive of dividends declared after the 1st of January 2019 for the fiscal year that ends in December. The price of a share is about $67.90. Elsewhere, Uganda has resubmitted a loan application to China for the construction of a rail line that links Kampala to the Kenyan border. The project covers about 270 kilometers of territory. The Ugandan government submitted its formal request to the Export-Import Bank of China back in September for a loan that would essentially cover 85% of the cost of building this rail line. But a late feasibility study by the lender has caused a delay in the review process. The rail line is part of a 2014 agreement between Kenya, Rwanda and South Sudan and Uganda to construct standard gauge rail lines in order to cut regional transport costs. Uganda plans to finish 126 kilometers of the Malaba to Kampala standard gauge rail line by June 2022. Away from the continent now, according to the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, potential investors in Africa want transparency and trust. She made that statement when addressing African leaders gathered for the third annual compact, the G20 Compact with Africa Summit in Berlin on Tuesday. The Chancellor also said that investors from G20 countries, like German medium-sized companies, want to know investment areas and conditions for putting their capital into countries. She said incentives for German firms that decide to invest more in Africa would be created. Germany already has reform partnerships, as they're called, with Ghana, Tunisia and Cote d'Ivoire. Senegal and Ethiopia joined that list on Tuesday. Germany put African inclusive growth high on the G20 agenda when it held the rotating presidency back in 2017. The objective was to address the root causes of mass migration from underdeveloped to developed countries.
We want to create incentives so that when the countries participating in Compact with Africa are successful, investment conditions for our companies are improved. We already have bilateral reform partnerships with some of the Compact countries, like Ghana, Tunisia and Ivory Coast, and now also with Senegal and Ethiopia. We can say that this is open to everyone. We will discuss conditions, and the Minister, German Development Minister Gerd Müller, is already in discussion with many Compact countries.
Now, for this next story, consider the fact that there's normal monetary policy and then there's extreme monetary policy. Zimbabwe's central bank has cut its key policy rate in half, from 70% to 35%. It's a part of an effort to revive an economy that's been crippled by years of bad policies and mismanagement. Now, the reduction is considered to complement the proposals in the 2020 budget proposal, which is premised on trying to boost productivity, job creation and economic growth. Measures have been implemented to fund the productive sectors by directing excess liquidity in the financial system. Zimbabwe's economy has been forecast to contract this year by about 7%, despite the reforms adopted by the monetary and fiscal authorities. Still, this rate cut, if you can even call it that, could bolster commodity prices in a country that faces really high levels of inflation, estimated at 380%. A UK Labour Party legislator says corruption under South Africa's former president, Jacob Zuma, was essentially enabled by international businesses and governments. The legislator in question is Peter Hain. He raised these allegations against three big banks, HSBC, Standard Chartered and India's Bank of Baroda. Now, he wants these institutions to recover the money that they helped to launder. SGTN's Angelo Coppola with reactions on the charges made at the latest in the state capture inquiry.
The reaction from the three named financial institutions was pretty much the same as it was when the story first broke in the international media. Complete and utter dead silence. In fact, Wayne Duvenage, the CEO of the organization Undoing Tax Abuse here in South Africa, also reminded us that the South African-based banks, that's Standard Bank, Nedbank, First National Bank and ABSA, should also be included in the dragnet, as they only acted towards the end of the alleged looting by the Gupta brothers. And they were also hiding behind that client confidentiality clause in the bank statements when they appeared before the Zondo Commission. In fact, the South African banks were testifying about meetings that were called by the disgraced Mineral Resources Minister Zwane after the decision to close those Gupta accounts had already been taken. The South African government, in fact, has also been quiet about the testimony yesterday by Lord Hayne and the recommendations that he made. But this is not unusual, as the government hasn't had much to say about any of the ongoing commission findings or testimony or evidence thus far. Of course, that may all change when former President Jacob Zuma testifies. I'm Angelo Coppola for CG10 in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Egypt will be launching its first communications satellite later this week. It's called Tiba-1. It will provide a full range of domestic telecommunications coverage and services to other countries on the continent as well. Egypt has been expanding its space infrastructure as preparations are underway to host the African Space Agency. Here's CGTN's Adel Marouki with the details.
With the Tiba-1 communication satellite, Egypt will be overcoming a major challenge to acquire full telephone and internet connectivity all over its mainland. Airbus has built it to provide civil and military services. Tiba-1's footprint also covers several Nile Basin countries.
The African Space Agency will be stationed here in the Egyptian space city, but the headquarters alone is not enough to enhance the African cooperation. Tiba-1 can provide telecommunication services to Kenya, Uganda and other Nile Basin countries.
This new addition to Egypt's satellite collection is expected to remain in orbit until the year 2035 at least. The 5.6-ton satellite will be launched from Kourou Space Center in French Guiana in Latin America. And it's just the beginning of space services Egypt will be providing to Africa.
We have also begun an initiative to create a satellite dedicated for African development. That will be through environmental satellites that monitor pollution and environmental changes in the African countries that will participate in it. We have invited 5 countries to discuss this initiative. These countries are Kenya, Uganda, Sudan and Morocco.
Tiba-1 is set to be launched on November 22.
Egypt is heavily investing in building space infrastructure. Tiba-1 will be the 3rd satellite the country launches in the last 5 months alone. 2 Cube remote sensing satellites have been already launched in July and September. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
One last story for you. The Trump administration has issued a new 90-day extension designed to allow American companies to continue doing business with Huawei. It's the 3rd time that Washington has allowed such a move to occur ever since it announced a ban on the Chinese telecommunications giant. But the company says this move won't have a serious impact on its operations.
The U.S. Commerce Department has allowed Huawei to purchase some American-made goods in a series of 90-day license extensions. That's after the U.S. added the Chinese company to an economic blacklist in May, citing security concerns. The Commerce Department says the extension aims to minimize disruptions for Huawei customers, many of which operate networks in rural America. The Rural Wireless Association says that about a dozen small rural carriers have purchased gear over the years from Huawei or ZTE. The association said replacing the equipment would cost about $1 billion. U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross said in a statement that the extension would allow carriers to continue to service customers in some of the most remote areas of the United States. Huawei said that the extension won't have a substantial impact on its business and that it doesn't change the fact that the company continues to be treated unfairly. The Chinese company said the decision to add it to the American Entity List has caused more harm to the U.S. than to Huawei. U.S. President Donald Trump signed an executive order declaring a national emergency in May and barred American companies from using telecommunications equipment made by companies posing a national security risk. The Commerce Department was directed to draw up an enforcement plan by mid-October, but has yet to publish one. The Federal Communications Commission will vote Friday on whether to ban wireless providers from buying Huawei equipment, with subsidies meant to expand broadband access to underserved areas. Song Yaotian, CGTN.
All right, then, I'll leave it there for the time being. I'll be back at the top of the hour, though. After months of delays and speculation, South Africa's biggest utility, Eskom, now has a new CEO. But he's not an industry insider, and he has no experience in the utilities world. Who is he and what exactly is ahead for him? We'll have some answers for you live from Johannesburg at 1800 GMT. See you then. For now, back to Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And we still have more news for you on the program. Here's what's ahead. Uganda confident of sealing the 2021 AFCON final ticket early after a Malawi win.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks, in the arenas of Africa. Were you born to be a player? Could this moment be yours? Sports Scene. Find your game.
The Athletics Integrity Unit has lifted the suspension of Kenyan long-distance runner Jacob Kendego over a doping offense. AIU posted on its Twitter handle that the disciplinary tribunal